Today, I want to talk a bit about consciousness. Now, of all the topics that I could possibly explore, I feel like this is one of the most loaded, uh, variable topics out there. It's not new. I mean, we've been discussing consciousness as we think of it today for 3,000 years, give or take. There have been books and papers and articles and movies and you name it. It's been poked at ad nauseum. So why do I feel the need to talk about it? In part because I'm really interested in what's happening in the AI field, and in part because I have debates with people all the time about what consciousness is, whether it's a good label or not, whether it matters, what might cause it, a whole bunch of things. So it's primarily the AI aspect, I think, that has this on my mind today. But I've written a really long blog post about it that's going to cover this way better than this video will. But I want to try and do this at least from a high level and keep it short. I want to keep this to about 10 minutes, give or take, for the sake of waning attention spans. So, what is consciousness? The honest answer is nobody knows. There are a lot of guesses, but nobody has been able to determine for sure what consciousness is, what causes it, why we have it, what all has it. It's a big unknown. There are tons of theories, dozens and dozens of different theories of consciousness with all sorts of variations. Personally, I have the strongest inkling that consciousness is something of a snipe hunt. So I'm a big fan of the concept of the map and the territory, which is basically that a map is a lower fidelity representation of reality. And that's a problem. We use maps. Our language is a map. The way we think of reality, the way we interface with reality, it's all maps. We're not using or really interfacing with the territory. We're using these abstractions. When we attach a label to something like consciousness, we create the idea of a thing, this singular thing that must exist. But the only singular thing is the label. I don't know if you've ever seen this. If you Google guy hammering nails into sand and then include the word language, you'll find this image. And there's this old dude, looks like a scientist or maybe just a cuckoo, with a hammer and nails at the edge of a beach, and the waves are washing in, and he's hammering nails in along the edges of the wave as if he's measuring where the waves end, where the beach begins. I don't know, but it says like humanity, the guy doing the nailing, language, the nails in the sand, and then off to the side over the ocean, the inherently indescribable nature of the universe. Now, I don't think that we can't describe the universe. I don't really think of it as indescribable per se, but it's a good representation of where we like to make things where things aren't there, draw boundaries where there aren't truly any boundaries. And you'll get this you'll find this sort of concept in the world of spirituality where they talk about like you can't really name or label a wave. Like a wave is just an emergent part of a whole, one small piece in constant motion. You can't draw lines or boundaries around it. Consciousness is interesting because we've attempted to draw a boundary around it. We've drawn lines, and maybe it's not the sort of thing where you can really do that effectively. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it is, that consciousness is something that's really clearly bounded, and we can describe it and identify what it is. What might it be? What might cause it? Personally, I think it's just an emergent property of having a brain that has multiple subsystems and modules that feed data back and forth and observe each other in various ways, coupled with environmental inputs and probably modified by language. Now, why do I think this? They're all of the animals that we would think exhibit uh, symptoms is the wrong word, exhibit hallmarks of consciousness, seem to have a split brain, so dual hemisphere brain, with the sole exception of cephalopods, which do not. But almost every other creature that we would attach that label to, elephants appear conscious, dolphins, perhaps corvids, dogs, humans, primates, all have this dual hemisphere brain. And there have been a number of people over the years who've talked about those hemispheres and their functions. And while it's the whole left brain, right brain concept is blown out of proportion and is not remotely accurate, it's true that there is some hemispheric specialization. And there's this idea of Robert Anton Wilson talked about the thinker and the prover, almost as if there's a portion of your brain that is processing and another portion that is narrating. And with split brain patient research, they found this. They found some really interesting things. So, for example, in somebody who's had a hemispherectomy, where they cut through and basically separate the hemispheres of your brain, something primarily done for epilepsy treatment, what they found is that through carefully controlled experiments, they can speak to one hemisphere or the other. And so they'll talk to one hemisphere and ask it to do something, and it'll do it. Pick up a cup or a pencil. Then they'll ask the other hemisphere, why did you just do that? And it'll make up a reason. It has nothing to do with the real reason. It's completely unaware that it was the other half was given instructions, and so just makes something up. And this is something that our brain does, this post hoc justification, where we'll do a thing and then we'll tell a story after the fact to explain why we did the thing. Consciousness could be this, something tied to this, in that you have one half and another half, and they're not really always communicating well. Even when connected, they don't always communicate well. And sometimes one will make up a story that has nothing to do with the real reasons or the reality. And so it's obvious that the brain takes in sensory inputs from a variety of sources and syncs those up, has to put them in an order, has to prioritize data. So you could be hearing a siren in the background while burning your finger on the stove, and one sense will fade while one sense will become stronger because one is a higher priority. So there's clearly something in the brain which prioritizes inputs and responses and coordinates all of these different portions of your brain that are doing different tasks. And I would argue that it is probably that. It is probably that coordination function that gives us this sense of consciousness, a self, the abstraction of a self, and observing ourself and that sort of experience, which is really interesting. And I'm in the camp of, like, I don't think consciousness is mystical. I don't think it's something that occurs outside the brain. I don't really buy into this whole quantum microtubule thing inside the brain. That doesn't really make sense. Not to say that we aren't all part of some sort of universal quantum field, but the quantum behavior inside of the brain seems unlikely, at least in the way it's being described. It would appear that we can turn consciousness on and off, which has been done with uh, anesthesia for ages. However, the argument that perhaps consciousness isn't being turned off, but only memory and recall is totally possible. Don't know. Not something that we've been able to determine. So, consciousness is this experience that we have to which we've attached a label, but it's very difficult to pin it down. And I think it's because, like, maybe it isn't this singular thing, in the same way that the Bible isn't a singular book. A whole bunch of books, different authors cobbled together. We think of it as one thing. And the brain isn't a single thing. We think of it as a brain. We look at pictures of the brain, but really it's a whole bunch of different submodules, many of which evolved at different periods of time, all kind of cobbled together and working, but not in a way that we fully understand. So consciousness is most likely not what it appears to be. And so I like to use the example of a mirage. There's a real thing happening. I mean, a mirage is a real phenomenon. But it's not a singular thing. You may look out and see something, and that mirage is existent because of humidity, lack of humidity, heat, sunlight, effects on your body. A whole bunch of pieces have come together to give you the experience of a mirage. I think it's like that with consciousness. I think there are a bunch of different things that are happening, and when they line up in just such a way, you get an experience to which we have conveniently attached a singular label of consciousness. And you'll get people who will make arguments like, well, what about qualia? What about the redness of an apple, or the zing of a lemon, or like these gradients of experience? Like, surely that must be a hallmark of consciousness. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think that's overthinking it. I think qualia is simply what you get when you have hardware and software that varies from person to person. Of course, you're going to have variations in experience. You have different hardware and different software. There's a lot of similarities, but it's not the same. No two people have exactly the same hardware and software. Even exact twins, their software at the very least differs over time, and their hardware also just due to interaction with the environment. So, no two people with the same hardware and software, no two experiences exactly the same. Qualia, therefore, nothing mystical. Anyway, there's a lot more to this, tons more that I could discuss. I will just point you to the blog post in the comments if you really want to go deeper. But suffice to say that I don't think consciousness is some special magical thing. I think it's a byproduct of a number of different brain modules and environmental factors, and probably modified by language, that give us this experience that we call consciousness. Which means that if it really is that, mundane is the wrong word, but if it really is just a bunch of systems working in a certain way together, then there's no reason why artificial intelligence couldn't have an experience that we would label conscious. Seems reasonable to me. Does it matter? I don't know. I don't know that consciousness is even a great label at all. Um, One example, so an argument I've heard repeatedly is p zombies, which is basically, if you have a thing that exhibits all of the behaviors of something that is consciousness, appears conscious, says it's conscious, describes its experience in a way that lines up with what you think of as your conscious experience, how do you know whether or not they're conscious? And it's a good way of representing how personal the experience of consciousness is, and how you can never really be sure that anyone else is conscious. You seem pretty sure that you are, but you have to take the word of others that they are so, and listen to their descriptions and evaluate. So if a p zombie could exist, if something could exist that seemed to show all the hallmarks of consciousness, but was not conscious, then that would mean the label of conscious or consciousness is completely pointless. There's no point in having a label that doesn't actually offer any sort of differentiation. So if a p zombie can exist, then consciousness is a stupid label and has no value. Anyway, food for thought. I'll link you to the blog post. Love to hear what you think. Drop a comment. Reach out to me on Twitter, not X, Twitter, forever. Yeah. Cheers.